but also if you're not paying attention, I will hunt you down and end your life.
She's going to throw things at you.
Yeah.
She's got a stash of stuff up here for the sole purpose of throwing it.
This is a glass bottle of kombucha. Like, it would probably hurt.
Probably.
No, I don't want to pay.
And then we'd have a medical emergency to handle.
Yeah. Woo! That's an excellent segue. I'm actually going to step back and just ask everybody, did you guys get one of these when you walked in?
Yes.
Does anyone not have one of these and would like one? You can have one. This is our fancy smanchy welcome packet. The relevant things in here are on page 3. Is a header that says feedback. We want your feedback, both about the presentations and about the conference. We tried a whole bunch of different stuff at this conference, and we'd like to know how well it worked for you. We also want to know what presentations you enjoyed and what presentations you learned from. So there's an online feedback form. There's a fancy QR code, which is extremely high-tech, I'm assured. All the cool kids are using them. You can also get a paper feedback form if you're not so high-tech. They're available in the admin area. So I just want to go ahead and get started. So this talk is called Handling Medical Emergencies. My name is Dan Collins. I'm a judge from coastal New Jersey, about an hour south of here. In my spare time, when I'm not judging or playing Magic, which is not very much, I'm also a volunteer EMT. So I wanted to take this conference as an opportunity to share some knowledge from that field. The title of the seminar is, indeed, as it says, How to Save Handling Medical Emergencies, but it could also be called How to Save Lives in Judge Magic, where we'll try to take some lessons from emergency medicine to improve our everyday judging. So this talk is going to have two parts. The first part is about saving lives. This part of the seminar is going to cover some basic medical emergencies. We're going to start with an overview of some things that might happen at tournaments. Basically, the thing that will help you handle a situation in a very generic sense with the expectation that you don't have any specialized training. Then I'm going to talk about a few specific scenarios that I've come across. I hope that this big picture stuff will be the most valuable part of this talk for you. But before I go any further, I do just need to say that this is not any sort of certified training qualification. It's just a quick overview of medical emergencies targeted for the layperson. This is not medical legal advice. I'm not a lawyer or a doctor. I'm certainly not your lawyer or your doctor. So if you have any concerns, please speak with a professional in that field. In general, as volunteers or as people who aren't being paid for medical services, we are protected from any liability under what's called the Good Samaritan law. That implies as long as you're acting in good faith. It is jurisdiction dependent, but as long as you're doing what you think is best and you're not exceeding your training, you're generally protected from any liability. The most important thing to note is that you don't want to discourage anyone from seeking medical attention if they want it. If you think that someone is having some sort of medical episode, it's always best to call 911 and let the ambulance evaluate them. Even if the patient doesn't want to go, it's best to let them get that professional checkup so that they can't blame anything on you. So there are a few goals for this talk. I want you to first and foremost know how to approach a medical emergency, or really any emergency at a tournament. I'd like to talk about how to gather information, what information you want to gather, and how to relay that to responders, and also how to treat some common illnesses. Now, it's my belief that you already know a lot about first aid. Judging and emergency medicine are fields that have a lot of overlap. Now, sure, judges need to know about a lot of complex rules interactions, and EMTs need to know about a lot of complex medical interventions. But in the end, we're both interacting with people who have had something go wrong, and our job is to fix it. As a judge, we're investigating a game state to determine what error was made. As an EMT or as just a first aider, we're investigating to determine what medical condition is going on and how we can best help the patient. Judges explain complex rules interactions. EMTs explain medical conditions and treatments in layman's terms. And in general, we're both dealing with people who aren't having the best of days. So a lot of our customer service and crowd management skills, not to mention investigations, stress management, conflict management, are applicable both in judging as well as in handling an emergency that might come up at an event. So since we've established that you're all already emergency management experts, let's look at some minutia. These are 3 tips that I want to just mention for any event. The first one is to know the location of AEDs in the venue. AED means Automated External Defibrillator. I assume that's an acronym that you may have heard of before. Did anyone notice if there's an AED in this building on your way in today?
There's one when you get in the door. It's like near the stairs to come up here.
Excellent. So
My wife said so. That's the first thing I look for when I get into buildings.
that's great. That's something that I want to recommend that we do as judges, even if you don't. Hopefully, you'll never need it, but it's good to know where it is, just so if God forbid that comes up, you can send a flare. Hey, go get that.
Is there a general place where they usually tend to be, like a door?
The question is there a general place where you can normally find one in a building?
No.
They tend to gravitate relatively close to either where they think information's going to be. Like I know at the Palace de Congrès, which is a venue in Montreal, that is near the information desk. Like, so wherever they think is going to have the highest traffic of people in the building is usually where it's going to be. So like obviously here, since most people coming through that front
In
door,
the main entrance, right?
it's in the main entrance. So they tend to be, but that's not like a hard and fast rule.
They're usually in a white box that is offset from the wall about 18 inches by 18 inches. They're usually at eye level, so they're easy to see. And they usually have like an emergency defibrillator or even sometimes like a yellow light or a blue light on top to call attention to them.
I mean, instructions on how to use those on the.
I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I will get into that. Right now, I just want to do it. Yes, Alan.
What do they usually look like, or are there any symbols that are usually associated with AEDs?
There's usually the text in big red letters, AED, and then a heart with a lightning bolt.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Specifically.
Yeah. Also, usually a white cabinet with red lettering.
Yes.
Yeah,
usually they have a window on the front so that you can see what's in there.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, know the address, and more importantly, your location in the venue. Right now, you guys could probably say, "Oh, I'm at Stevens Institute of Technology," to a 911 operator, and they'll know that you're within an area of 5 or 6 city blocks. If you know that you're in the Babbio Center, they'll know what building you're in, but this is still a 6-story building. So every time you're at a convention center, make a note of don't just follow the planeswalker signs to the GP. Know what hall you're in, know how to describe that location. That way, if someone does need to ask you to call 911, you can say, "Oh, I'm in the DC Convention Center, Hall A, by the south entrance."
Something that I do when I work events is when I start a page in my judge notebook for the event, I put, GP, whatever, or SG, whatever, and then I just put that information on the first page and then continue with the rest.
That's a great way to make sure that you have that information, and practice makes perfect. If you always do that, you'll always know where to find it.
Yeah.
And you'll always do it.
And
you'll always do it, yeah.
Also don't assume that it's like conference hall, just like ask somebody if like that specific hall has a name.
A name or a number or a letter. And finally, just identify yourself to the head judge and the TO, the tournament organizer, if you have any formal training. This is useful because you're an EMT. EMT?
Lifeguard and medical first responder.
Okay, so you're CFR. Does anyone else have any medical training, like first aid?
Somebody get on all of it?
I've been first aid and CPR certified for a while.
Okay, so that's definitely good stuff to identify to a TO. I say specifically to the TO or to the head judge, because if something does happen at the event, they are the most likely people to see it first. They're at the main event stage, so people go up to them if there's a problem. They're also high up, so they can see the entire tournament. So maybe if they know your name, they can page you over the loudspeaker if they have a situation that might require your assistance. And I know that that's happened to myself and to Paul Baronet at different events, because Paul is also an EMT. This is our judge announcement. Dan Collins or Paul Baronet, please come to the stage. And if you are in a situation where you'd be willing to help in a situation like that, definitely make sure that the GP, the TO, or maybe one of the head judges or a judge manager is aware that you're trained, available, and willing to help. If something does happen, and we're going to talk about a very general situation here, and the reason we're going to do that is because there are all sorts of different things that can go wrong. And I just want to give tips that will help you handle any generic situation. The first tip is to take charge of the situation. Calmly approach, walk if you must, but don't run. Enlist extra help on the way, which might be able to help you control the situation. Running in a crowded hall is dangerous, and it makes it look like you're panicking. One of the biggest training challenges in new EMTs and firefighters is knocking that adrenaline response out of them, because running into an emergency with a fight or flight response going is probably the best way to make the emergency worse. And in untrained or inexperienced responders who are just dealing with something, it's very easy for that to become your emergency instead of someone else's emergency that you're trying to help. So walking, taking slow, deep breaths, And not trying to avoid getting overwhelmed is a great way to limit the degree of kind of panic that is going to happen at whatever that situation might be. It's very important for us to manage the stressful situation rather than to let it overcome us. It's fine if you, as the first judge at the patient, don't know what to do medically to help them. You're not expected to. Your role as an authority figure is to maintain calm, just walk, breathe, give instructions calmly and clearly, help find other people who can help, and help activate 911. The most important thing to do is to direct someone, specifically and individually, to call 911. Has anyone heard of the bystander effect? Okay, that's quite a few hands. This is a well-documented social phenomenon. Someone collapses in the middle of a crowd of 1,000 people. You yell, "Somebody, call 911." And odds are nobody's going to do it because they're all looking at this crowd of 999 other people and thinking, oh, it's fine. There's 1,000 people here. Somebody else will call 911. On the other hand, if I say, you, Brogan, call 911 and stay right here, then not only do I know that Brogan's going to be on the phone with 911, I know that if I have to get any information to 911 or I need any information from them, I know who's on the phone. And I know that it's someone who is also a judge, also an authority figure, and it's going to be easy to find. Yeah.
So you're saying we designate someone to call 911. Ideally, it should be a judge.
Ideally, it should be a judge or someone who you know, someone who you recognize, so that you can find them later. Yeah.
I was gonna say, while it's good sometimes to have the person calling 911 to be the person like physically at this where the incident's happening, it's also sometimes good to ask them to go to the entrance or like where. So that way, because like security isn't going to know where this emergency is.
Certainly.
But you, the 911 caller, like especially they'll hear your voice when they come in. They'll be like, "There's an emergency." You can say, "Hi, I was the person that called."
So one thing that we do at magic events to identify locations is we say, "Oh, it's at table number 300," and then venue security shows up and they have no idea where table number 300 is.
Yeah. So
and
it's
the
good
cops
to
show up and they have no idea where table.
Yeah. So it's a good idea to sometimes send the person who called 911 to the nearest entrance or
someone who knows to look for security.
And I was going to say it doesn't always have to be the caller.
Yeah.
Especially in a big situation, if they want someone near the caller near.
It has to be someone.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to want the person who's on the phone with 911 to stay nearby so that I can relay information. Your mileage may vary. If you're at a small event with only 2 or 3 other judges, maybe you don't have the manpower to keep one person with you and send someone else away. Jason?
You can recruit the players of
Absolutely. Players as well.
Turns out they know where their table is pretty well.
It's true. And again, if you are going to recruit people, specific instructions calmly and clearly is the best way to get people to help you. Hey, do me a favor, not, oh my God, there's an emergency, go. Yeah. Slowly, calmly be clear about what you need. And that's a little bit distracted on my word. Next step, yell. Does anyone know first aid? If you think that you need some professional assistance right away, if there's somebody on the floor and you don't know what to do about it, hey, does anybody know first aid? Is anybody an EMT? Let them respond to the situation. Even if you don't have anyone who can help, even if you're not directly giving any medical intervention, just clear the area. Don't allow crowds to gather around. Magic is a spectator sport, medical emergencies are not. You want to clear enough space around whatever it is that's going on. Maybe push some tables to one side or the other so that the patient is safe and so that the ambulance can respond to them easily. Finally, safety first. Don't come into contact with any body fluids if you're not trained to do that thing. Someone has some gloves. I also have some gloves.
I have not today. But
Not today.
Too.
But yeah, don't. If you're not trained to be reaching about inside somebody's blood and stuff, don't. The best thing you can do is just clear the area and just be on the phone with 911. Be the responsible person who's keeping everyone else calm and clear. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's talk about actually providing help. Let's say that we have a patient. Yeah, Dylan.
I think it's fair to say that there's kind of one exception to that rule with the don't interfere with bodily fluids. That's if for some reason there's an artery cut and there's blood everywhere, stopping the artery from.
In terms of the patient, stopping the or gushing arterial bleed is important. In terms of your own safety, find something that will make sure that blood does not get on any open wounds. Okay. Your safety is first. Yeah, first. Yeah.
When you say open wounds, is that like scabs or just like anything that's currently?
If you have a scab or a cut that's like in the process of healing, but there's still either a scab over it or like something that you think could bleed, could start to bleed, it's still open enough that you could potentially become that could potentially be like a bloodborne exposure risk. So gloves or just don't. If we are talking about like a major bleed, like what you were talking about, grabbing like a jacket or a tablecloth or something else that's nearby to use as padding, and even telling the patient, hey, hold this on your arm as tight as you can. It's probably better than going in yourself and getting this. Do not recommend that. So let's say we're talking to a patient, they're conscious. First and foremost, I'd introduce yourself and your level of training. Your job is to basically calm them down. They want to know who you are. They don't want to be like interrogated by someone with a ton of questions right away. Just let them know you're there to help. Hi, my name's Dan Collins. I'm a judge. I'm also an EMT. How are you feeling today? Ask questions about the situation, about what happened. If odds are you're not going to do very much, again, just talk, help keep them calm, down whatever information you can to relay to the 911 operator. But if you are going to administer any first aid, ask for consent and explain what you're doing first. And of course, like we just discussed, appropriate precautions for any bodily fluids. What type of questions do we want to ask? So this is information that you should probably immediately relay to the 911 operator. And it's more or less in order of importance. The most important facts: conscious, breathing, pulse. If a patient is unconscious or unresponsive, that is, if they're not talking to you, they don't respond to their name, they're on the ground, their eyes are closed, they're unconscious or unresponsive. This is information that you want to feed back because it will result in a stepped-up emergency response. If you have CPR or first aid training, check for a pulse or a breathing. Generally, it's pretty easy to see if someone's breathing. If you're going to check for a pulse, you would do it either at the carotid artery right here or the radial artery at the wrist between the two bones over here. The best place to learn how to do that, because I simply don't have 4 hours with you guys today, is a CPR class, because that is a course that they will need to teach you, and I'll have some recommendations on the last slide. If you do know how to check these things and either is absent, you probably already know to relay that information to the 911 operator immediately. Ask, does anyone know CPR? And send someone to find that AED we saw earlier. Yes.
He had first aid and CPR training in the past, but it's lapsed.
I would recommend that you still use the training that you have. CPR doesn't change much. Changes a little bit, but the old protocols are still better than nothing. If you have past training, use it. Some other questions that you might want to ask if they are conscious, if that first list of red flags didn't trigger anything. Are you having any trouble breathing? Do you have any pain anywhere? How bad? Where is it? What does it feel like? Have you ever felt like this before? That last question is helpful. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll have someone who says, you know what? I felt like this right when I was having my last heart attack. And that's probably something that you want to tell 911.
Also asking if they have any conditions.
Certainly, any pertinent medical history.
Yeah.
So this is the part of the talk where we get into some very specific situations with the. I want to say the concept that hopefully and probably you will never need any of these specific pieces of information. But if you do, now you know. And these are some things that I have seen happen at magic events. Luckily, not the last one. But an allergic reaction, a panic attack, fainting or seizures.
There's 2 others that I want to add to the list as well.
What else would you like to suggest?
Dehydration and diabetic emergency.
Those are both great. Dehydration is something that comes up very often. Dehydration is basically you're going to have someone who hasn't been drinking water today. I'm sure we've all heard that happen at magic events. Wait, I got my water bottle, didn't I? Yep. That's something that happens. Diabetic emergency will manifest in one of 2 ways. They will either be very weak or they will be unconscious.
The other is they will get very combative.
Sure. Okay. Yes. Because there are actually 2 different types of diabetic emergency. Diabetes is a condition where your blood sugar doesn't get regulated properly. If it gets too high or too low, you get certain medical conditions that show up. Generally, diabetics are very well trained at handling their condition. Generally, they take insulin, they take glucose. If you have a diabetic emergency, call 911, let 911 handle it. They will have a glucometer, and they will be able to determine which end of the spectrum the patient's on. I don't recommend any sort of on-the-ground treatment for that.
At the point at which that's going to become relevant, they are clearly aware that that's.
Yes, it will be obvious that it is an emergency. So I want to talk briefly about an allergic reaction. The fellow whose arm is there on the slide is having a minor allergic reaction. You can tell because he has a rash, he has hives, he has swelling. Now, we all know that some people who get very bad allergies carry what's called an EpiPen. An allergic reaction is different from what's called anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis, not every allergic reaction requires an EpiPen. And some signs that you do need an EpiPen and need to call 911 are the other things here. Disoriented or confused, any sort of trouble breathing, maybe some swelling in the airway, and also what we call obvious distress. Now that's kind of a cheating answer. It's basically an extremely technical medical way of saying if they look like they're in trouble, they're probably in trouble. Works for diabetes too, works for a whole bunch of other stuff. The first step in treatment on all of these slides is to call 911. The only reason I'm covering this slide is to say, number one, if you have a minor allergic reaction, don't assume that the patient needs an EpiPen. If they have one and they want to administer it, don't stop them. But don't necessarily recommend that a patient use their own medication unless they think it's appropriate. Step two, if you do see that disorientation, confusion, difficulty breathing, where it seems like they are actually in a medical emergency, ask them, do you have an EpiPen? And get them to administer it if possible. Don't administer it yourself unless you need to. Yes?
How would you?
I will first, the second paragraph on their list here. First, don't use an EpiPen that does not belong to the patient. Don't encourage anyone to use an EpiPen that does not belong to them. If a bystander comes by and says, hey, I have this EpiPen, do you think they need it? The answer is no. We've already called 911 and help is on the way. If you do think that you need to use an EpiPen, try to get the patient to do it first. In case that doesn't work, in case they can't, I'm going to tell you roughly how it works. They come in a case, generally. You take them out of the case. They have one or two caps. The caps are usually orange. There's usually one on the back, and there's sometimes one on the front. Remove the caps, pull them off, and hold the EpiPen with your hand around the pen. Do not hold your thumb on the back of the pen, because if you're holding the pen backwards, you'll have a needle through your thumb. Not recommended. Hold it with your fingers around the pen and inject it into the side of the thigh. There's a bone that goes right here. You don't want to hit the bone. You want to be slightly behind it in the muscle.
These needles are strong enough to go through 3/4 inch plywood.
These needles are quite strong. You will feel a click, and then you will hold the needle where it is for 10 seconds, and then pull it straight out. Once you pulled it out, the needle will retract, and it will no longer be dangerous. But it is spring-loaded. It is quite strong.
So it injects by itself.
It is an auto-injector, yes. They will, as soon as you push it on the side and apply enough force, you will hear a click, and you will feel it. That is how you know it has been applied. Hold it for 10 seconds, then pull it straight out.
The click, it sounds very similar to like clicking your pen. Like it's a very distinctive. Like it's not something you have to like listen for and hope that you hear it. It's like a very distinctive.
You will know. You will feel pushing against the spring, and you will suddenly feel that the spring is clicked.
It's kind of the necessary thing. Cause...
Yep. Hold it for 10 seconds, then pull it straight out. Once you have removed it, then it should be safe. The needle will retract into the casing. Keep the EpiPen for EMS. Show it to them so that they know what was administered before they arrived. If you do administer an EpiPen, the patient still needs to go to the hospital. It still needs to be seen by 911. It is not a cure. It is just a temporary relief. Finally, only do this if the patient is physically unable to administer it themselves, or they're in such obvious distress that they can't understand. There's, like I said, you're protected from legal liability as long as you're acting in good faith. But
You want to show up.
we want to avoid giving people drugs, basically, if we don't absolutely have to. So again, limited duration, they have to see EMS, and this is hopefully something. I've been an EMT for 3 or 4 years. I've been on squads with like a total of 100, 200 EMTs, and I've never heard of anyone who's actually had to use one on a patient on a 911 call. Have you?
I've had a couple of
Had a couple at squads?
Yeah.
Once? Okay.
Peanut
It's-
allergies exist, and there is a cafeteria.
Yeah, it happens.
But it's different patients can swell.
Okay.
So like,
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
the case of
they couldn't
Jen,
do it themselves.
Yeah, so they physically couldn't.
They
do
were
it themselves.
physically unable to administer it.
In the case for me, it was the kid didn't know he had peanut allergy, and
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and
More times than not, they just ask you to get it. Like the few times that I've had like allergic reactions, the person's been like in distress, but like is responsive, and they've been like, "Can you get my EpiPen? It's like
Yeah.
in my bag, or it's over there."
Yep. For the most part, people who have these serious allergies know about it. There are always first times for everything, though. Speaking of first times for everything, I do want to talk. This slide is real short in terms of text because I want to talk about this rather than read about it. A panic attack is a stress-related condition. It sounds like it's just panic, but it is a legitimate medical condition, and the symptoms can lead to a true medical emergency. It's important not to write it off as, oh, they're just having stress, or oh, they're just overwhelmed by the tournament environment, because this can lead to physiological symptoms. Tournaments, especially like large events like GPs and Opens, they're a prime environment for first-time sufferers. It's worth noting that despite the kind of magic player stereotype of an unhealthy young male who probably eats junk food all day, most medical emergencies that come up at tournaments are first-time things, whether it's a first-time seizure or a first-time panic attack or something like that, at least in my experience. So this has been the case every time that I've had a medical emergency happen at an event that wasn't like a cut or a scrape. Panic attacks are often like this. While some people are predisposed to them, there are many people who would just be overwhelmed by a large event or by a large open call. They're generally attributed to a buildup of multiple triggers. Those triggers can include a lot of the things you would normally expect to trigger a stress reaction, whether it's being in a tournament environment, especially a competitive tournament environment, added stress due to judges or spectators watching over them, a crowded room, or alternately a large open space, loud noises from continuous conversation, or even sharp noises like applause can trigger something like that. Uncomfortable lighting, and of course hunger, dehydration, all leads into that same. And the symptoms, like I said, surprisingly include both an emotional and physical element. They kind of feed off of each other. When you're feeling the stress causes the physical response, which in turn makes you more stressed out. Interrupting the cycle is the key to treatment. So the signs and symptoms you're likely to see are apparent breathing problems, maybe wheezing, shallow, rapid, or heavy breathing, tremors, numbness or tingling, especially in the fingers and toes, maybe even like the forearms and the legs, caused by decreased blood flow, but numbness or tingling is going to be a common symptom. Lightheadedness, again, decreased blood flow. Visual changes, including like a loss of peripheral vision, where they might report seeing bright lights or blinking lights. Heart palpitations, chest pain, or a fight or flight response. Basically, they might feel the need to escape whatever they think is triggering this. Treatment is difficult, but it basically involves an attempt to halt both sides of this. Start by coaching their breathing if necessary. I usually start by instructing them to just take slow, deep breaths. But if that doesn't immediately work, you can actually coach them through a breathing rhythm. In for 3 seconds, out for 3 seconds. Do it with them. Just emphasize slow, deep breaths. That helps which basically helps slow everything else down. Once they're not hyperventilating, just talk to them. Introduce yourself. If a game is in progress, just reassure them that there's no rush because they will get an extension. Ask easy questions, establish a history. When did this start? Why do you think this is happening? Do you have any medical conditions, any medications? Are you starting to feel better? Identify the stressors and start to remove or resolve them. Pausing the match suspends the stress of that competitive match. Walking outside with them takes them away from the stress of being in a bright or a loud hall. And taking a break for a little longer than necessary can help prevent it from happening again. Don't end your interaction with the player until the player feels as though everything's resolved.
As well as someone who suffers from panic attacks and had to deal with panic attacks at events. It's also really, like the last point that Dan said is like very, very important. Like don't think, oh, the person's no longer hyperventilating, or I think eight's improved, or you've given them like a 10-minute break. That like, oh, I should just walk away. Just be like, hey, do you want me to stay? Like, I had a player ask me to like stay around the event. Like if he was like, you don't have to stay at my table, but can you like be in the area? Just like make just ask the player what they think they need.
Exactly. Help make them feel comfortable.
It's like doing any other investigation that you do, which is like a very important thing to just like keep in mind. Is like just treat it like an investigation and like whatever. Yeah, figure out the most important
don't
ways.
leave just because the match slip has been signed and you have to walk it up. Wait until the patient feels as though all their symptoms have been resolved.
From a logistics perspective,
Yes.
Say that this person has this panic attack. There's 10 minutes left in the round, right? And you're at like some big event. It's not like a store where no one's really going to care. And you're doing it. And like 20 minutes, 30 minutes pass. Like you're over time. Like.
So the question is, from a tournament logistics perspective, what do we do when interrupting the match and handling this medical emergency impacts with round turnover? My answer is that this sounds an awful lot like a significant and exceptional circumstance. This sounds like something like a table flipping over. This sounds like something that has no applicable policy, philosophy, or guidance, which means policy doesn't say anything. Policy says the head judge should do what they feel is best. Oftentimes, in a situation like this, the best thing to do is to separate the player and the tournament. The player hasn't finished their match, you can enter them as a loss to that round and just take them off to the side and let them continue to get better.
In many of these circumstances, people might not necessarily be going back to play Magic again.
Right, they may not even want to continue the tournament. And if we're 10, 20, 30 minutes into the situation like this, they're probably fine with, they're probably going to be understanding once they recover with the fact that we had to keep the tournament going.
Just an observation. Sure. As Amanda said, I'm also a person who suffers from panic attacks. I've repeatedly had them. One of the things that I've noticed, two things, that sometimes you don't necessarily realize you're having a panic attack. It's just one of those moments where, hey, I suddenly feel like my veins are full of gasoline and everything's on fire, and I don't know what to do. And sometimes,
it's not a binary statement.
It's one of those things that a panic attack is just. It is a very umbrella statement, and in terms of interacting with the way that it manifests itself, one of the things that I have found help myself and a lot of people who I know who are having panic attacks is when they are starting to calm down, if you just talk to them in a very calm, collected, fairly concise manner, just very casual conversation. I've noticed that has a very positive effect on de-escalating the situation.
Just basically be a friendly figure, help them calm down.
Let them know you care.
Yeah.
The flip side to that is if the individual who is suffering a panic attack is clearly not in the mood to have any sort of conversation, don't try to force one, because that will just escalate the situation. I've been in situations like that where I'm just sitting there and someone's like, "Can I help you with anything?" I'm like, "No.
You don't want to be overbearing.
Yeah, let me just sit here and work through this, and when I reach a point that I want to talk to someone, I will let you know. Let me sit down and take care of this right now."
Because being overbearing can itself basically make it worse. And a lot of people, I assume you would agree that a lot of people who regularly get panic attacks have their own ways of managing that.
Yeah.
And don't necessarily need to be interviewed.
Yeah. The other thing is that the way my panic attack whether some panic attacks manifest is that they can just be overwhelmed with the number of people that they're interacting with, and so having another person or even multiple people stand around, and act concerned. It's just like, just leave me alone. I know what I need to do. Just let me sit down, and we'll go from there.
Yep.
And so, in that case, I would say, is there anything that I can do to help you get through this faster?
Is there anything that I can do to help?
Yes.
And if not, just step away.
Yeah. And even then, you could just say, if they say no, then say, all right, if you do think of something that I can do, I can be found over here.
Yep, exactly.
And if you would just like to talk, I can also, I'm more than happy to come over and just sit down with you for a bit.
And I don't generally go straight to 911 for these, but EMS can be helpful if the symptoms don't seem to be resolving. They've probably dealt with it more often than most of us have, except, of course, for those of us who deal with it regularly. They can provide useful resources, including oxygen.
There just comes a point where no amount of talking or interaction or even taking anti-anxiety medicine, trying to de-escalate it yourself, there's just a point where there's just nothing that you can do short of a medical intervention that can help.
Yep. Does anyone else have any other questions about that before we move on? Okay, so, yeah, John. Adam.
So,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. When we approach ourselves and we just like want to go from like introducing ourselves, and you said like, you know, we should first get them to breathe, then introduce ourselves, be this friendly figure. Do we just go straight away and just start talking about their condition, or do we just let them
see if there's anything that you, basically your goal is to see if there's anything that you can do to help. Anything that you can take away, anything that you can relieve as a stressor. And if not, just talking about their day, being a casual kind of person they can converse with, basically relieves the stress, puts them in a different mindset.
And just one last note, it's very important that you present yourself as calm
Yes.
and collected, because if you are panicking or if you're showing any signs of, I don't know how to deal with this,
That's
that
really
can
essential.
escalate the panic attack further and just be like, oh great, I'm completely beyond help right now.
In every situation, in order to avoid making a situation worse, it's our job to remain calm, collected, make it seem like we know what we're doing, even if we don't. The next kind of pair of situations is fainting and seizures. The causes are different, but the treatment is similar. And these are lumped into the same thing because the first sign of a problem will probably be that your patient is on the floor. Signs and symptoms: if they feel dizzy or lightheaded, that's a sign that it's going to be fainting. If they're staring into space, that's probably a seizure. If they're shuddering or twitching rapidly, that's a specific type of seizure called a grand mal seizure. If you're nearby, try to catch them and just lower them to the ground, protect their head. If they are actively seizing, it's important to note that our goal is not to stop the seizure. Our goal is to protect the patient until the seizure ends. What that means is we want to move any heavy or hard or sharp objects away from them, push some tables and chairs away, try to cushion their head if they're actively seizing so they don't hit the concrete floor too hard, too repeatedly. Don't stick anything in their mouth. Once they are no longer actively seizing, put them in their recovery position, which is basically laying on your side with your knees bent a little bit like that and the head tilted up to keep the area open. Hey, it's a ball. The other items that I wanted to include here, two pieces of information to have. Number one is to record the start time of the seizure and relay that information to 911. Just the start time. It's worth noting that a lot of people, as we know from roleplay, are really bad at estimating time. So if we tell a paramedic, oh, he's been seizing for 5 minutes, they're not going to believe you. If you say he's been seizing for 10 minutes, they're definitely not going to believe you. If you say the seizure started at 11:30, they're going to believe you. The second thing is that after a seizure, they're basically in a state that's called post-ictal. That's a real complex word that basically means post, after, ictal, seizure, after seizure. They're in that state for about 10 minutes where they're basically disoriented or less responsive while their brain reboots and they start processing input properly again. Keep them calm and comfortable. Don't be too demanding of answers from them, and just help them get back to normal in a calm and collected environment.
You said that we should protect their head when they're seizing. If we don't have anything to rest their head on, should we try to cradle their head so that it doesn't
I usually
around
kneel at their head with my hands just under their head.
Mm-hmm.
If you have like a towel or a jacket or a coat nearby, that's Any other questions? The last item is, and this was foreshadowed when we asked about the AEDs earlier, is how do we use it? So first of all, the signs and symptoms are if the patient is unconscious, they are not breathing, and they do not have a pulse. As I said, determining whether they have a pulse, determining whether they're breathing, CPR classes are great for that. I'll have a few links at the end, or names at the end of how to find those. If you feel that this is necessary, the patient is on the ground and they do not seem to be breathing, if you know how to initiate CPR, do so. That's what your training says. If not, just find an AED, turn it on, and follow its instructions. The first instruction will probably be call 911, so make sure someone's doing that.
Make sure a specific person's doing
A
it.
specific person is doing that. See, Brogan remembered. That's great. When you take it out of its case, when you open its case, it will usually automatically turn on and start talking to you. If not, look for a big power button. It will probably be green and have a power symbol on it. That is how you turn it on. Usually they are in a case that will turn on when it's opened, or the pads are in a case that will turn on when it's opened. The pads will usually have a diagram showing where to put them. The case will also usually have a diagram showing where to put them. And this is designed to be used by someone who's entirely untrained. It will talk you through every step. It will tell you to attach the pads to the patient using the diagram. It will tell you when to stop touching the patient and when to hit the little red button. I see a couple hands, so let's answer those questions.
AEDs are incredibly good at telling somebody who has no clue how to use
Yes.
how to use it.
Yes.
I was gonna, kind of what he said. The best thing is, like, you might think that that's a dummy. Like, no, all of the AEDs have, like...
That's actually a particularly smart one. Usually they don't have that graphic.
Yeah, but one of the things, just to keep, in case you were worried, the AED will not let you shock the person if they don't need it.
Can't screw up.
You, another thing just to keep in mind, make sure that there's nothing wet and that they don't have any bandages near the areas.
Sure,
that you're applying the pads.
A couple of things to look for. So first of all, remove their shirt. You're going to need to put the pads on bare skin. As you're doing so, if you see like a nicotine patch or a medication patch, a lot of people have those. You don't want to put these on top of those because one of the types of medication used in those patches for like heart conditions is called nitroglycerin. Which sounds an awful lot like an explosive because it is. Don't recommend doing that. They are flammable. They will light the patient on fire. For a place that is not on top of a medication pad. If you see like a bulge in the skin, that could be an implanted defibrillator. Move it away from those as well. Any clear skin, roughly where they say on the picture, the relevant part being that the heart is between those two pads.
Avoid overly hairy locations.
So 2 questions. First of all, just to make sure I get this, the AED is a fallback if you don't know CPR, or
No,
something
the AED
regardless?
is used as part of your CPR training.
Okay.
However, if you do not have CPR training, the best thing to do is to just find an AED and use it.
Okay, and secondly, you said avoid fluids. So what if they're having bleeding, even if it's just minor bleeding in the area?
If they're having bleeding like in the area where you would put the pads, move the pad to the side if you can. Otherwise, just do what you have to do and put them as close to the target location as possible. Blood is a fluid; it is conductive, so if the electrical shock will still get through. In theory, it will just basically make the adhesive a little bit worse. The great thing about the pads is they're actually they're that size. They're 4 inches by 6 inches, so there's plenty of adhesive. They will, unless their chest is wide open, they will find something to stick to.
Oh, so the fluid is just for the adhesive, not for...
It's for a little bit of both. Basically, if you're in a puddle of something, if you're outside in the rain, the concern is that you might inadvertently shock yourself. That's not supposed to happen. It's very difficult to make that happen, but it's probably a good idea to avoid. Any other questions? Yes.
So this is going to be completely just unaware question. I'm not terribly informed with regards to treatment. I heard somewhere that AED intervention is not necessarily as effective as one would assume.
Correct. It is. The rates of this actually working are slim and they're hard to calculate because there are a lot of variables involved.
My understanding of the way it was presented to me was it is a very specific type of cardiac arrest.
That's partly true. Yes.
And
there are specific things that they can treat, and there are specific things that they cannot.
But
however, you will not know if it's something that they can treat or not.
The other thing is that it is worth it because in the event that it's the one that the AED can treat,
correct,
it treats it.
Correct, and it will not attempt to treat a rhythm that it is not.
And it won't make it worse.
Yeah. It will not attempt to shock a patient that is having a regular heartbeat or that it cannot fix. Yes.
So if it won't shock because of one of those reasons, what would be the steps?
If you know CPR, do CPR. Otherwise, wait for 911.
Or find someone who can do CPR.
Find someone who can do CPR. Hey, does anybody know CPR? Or the 911 operator will generally attempt to do what they call operator-assisted CPR, where they talk you through the process. If that's something that you wind up doing, basically you're going to be told to push hard and fast in the center of the chest with both hands, about 100 beats per minute. We're trying to basically compress the chest. You will feel some popping as the ribs separate from the sternum. It's bad, but it's not very bad. It's less bad than being dead. So, you know. But yeah, I'm gonna.
Being dead is one of those things that you can't.
That's why the
recover
dummy
from.
makes the locking noise. It's to prepare you to be like
Exactly.
comfortable with that noise, because when you first do it, it's a very like discomforting noise to hear.
Exactly. So I'm going to cut this short because I do want to have some time if there's any more questions, and it is actually already 11:48. But if you have any questions, you can find me in those places. If you are looking for CPR first aid training, and I recommend that you do, the American Heart Association and the American Red Cross both certify CPR trainers. There are both certified people for CPR. There are a number of other organizations that do so. If you're looking for additional training above those courses, you can look for first aid courses or healthcare provider or professional rescuer courses.
Will you be posting these slides somewhere?
The slides, as well as the recorded presentation, will be posted online. They will be mailed out to the conference forum? Yes, to the conference forum, as well as in the regional group once they're done. You had a hand first?
Yeah, so I know this is secondary to the help with the player, but you talked briefly about what to do in the tournament situation specifically that relate to these things, as far as like clearing other players away, making sure they keep playing their matches, things like that.
So, I mean, one thing we did discuss is trying to make sure that the space around the player, around the patient is clear. That's going to involve moving some tables away and probably interrupting a couple of matches. Since we don't want a crowd around whatever it is that's going on, once the situation is more or less under control, we want to get those matches back to playing again. We are going to wind up giving a lot of people time extensions. However, basically enlist whatever judges that you can to assist in basically clearing that space and getting the players who can continue their matches to their side. Is there any more specific questions?
No, really, just kind of wanted to see if there was any more specific thing you had related to coaching.
Do you have an answer?
Yes, so one specific thing that I would add here, especially for very large events, is to make sure you designate somebody to take care of whatever duties you might have. And this is especially true for the head judge. I actually had this happen to me at SCG Open, where I heard of a medical emergency happening. I was really thinking, oh, someone else can handle it. I should be the head judge on stage. And I was like, no, that's stupid. So Eric Levine, fortunately, was there. Eric, you're the head judge. I went over to find players who were seizing, started helping SCG staff and other people who were already at that position. So if you believe you're the most qualified person in the room, you should go there, and judging is nowhere near important.
Sure. Question?
That was more just like a quick statement. If you're looking to do any sort of CPR first aid training, if you live near a university, and you go to their fitness building, usually on their bulletin board, or if you just ask information, like my university does one like 4 times a semester.
Yeah.
Like, so even if you're not like you don't want to go to the American Red Cross website or whatever, usually just going to a university.
Do them. A lot of like
YMCA's do them,
squads,
Boys and Girls Clubs do them. Local Boy and Girl Scouts and Eagle Scouts, even though they're for the members, if you usually say like, hey, I heard you're doing a training, can I tag along?
Yeah, and a lot of these are actually listed on like the Red Cross and Heart Association websites. Josh?
Are there any points that we should move the patient, or should we just try
avoid it unless the patient is in an imminent danger? If they're
headed next to
I can't think of any real reasons in a controlled like tournament environment. No.
Like in a tournament environment, you probably won't.
The only situation is if you are moving that patient into their recovery position, in which case you just roll them onto their side. Otherwise, especially in the case of a fall and injury, as opposed to a medical emergency, if it's a fall, definitely leave them where they are and encourage them not to move.
Another thing to think about is if you aren't trained and you already see there's a couple judges at a situation,
right?
Keep running the tournament.
See if there's anything you can do to help. Ask, hey, do you need anything else? Is there anything I can do? But then
if
don't crowd around.
If you see there's already like 6 judges there, there's probably not much you can do to help.
Yes. Odds are we don't need the entire judge staff.
It's because in a GP setting, if you lose all of the floor coverage,
you know. Sappy? Anything else?
Yes, I was just like kind of wondering like when you need to both tend to somebody who's in need of help and you also need to recruit judges. How do you actually go about doing that like that?
Judge.
Okay.
That works.
Somebody will come over.
Or as you're walking on your way, hey Paul, can you help me out with this? Hey Sappy, I might need your help a little bit. Josh, and then we really have to break.
Okay. So if you're or whoever is the first one to be there, let's just stay there the whole time so there's someone who knows everything that's been happening.
That would be ideal, yes. 911, the ambulance is going to have some questions, and just to have the person who was there the longest to answer those questions.
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
anyone has any other questions, you know how to get a hold of him. And
So please find your next talks. Remember to fill out those feedback forms.